Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People story. My son Jason is 6 years old and has autism. He's a happy, sweet boy who loves playing with his toy cars. They're his favorite possession. He has a whole little parking garage set up in his room where he spends hours happily zooming his little cars around, making little vroom vroom noises. Well, one Saturday we were at the park and Jason was playing with one of his cars on a picnic blanket while I read a book. He was absorbed in his own little world, innocently rolling his car back and forth across the blanket. That's when this woman, who I immediately pegged as a Karen type, marched over with her bratty son in tow. Without even a hello, she pointed to the car in Jason's hands and said to her son, "Oh, look, sweetie, that nice boy has the same car you wanted. Why don't you go ask him to share?" Before I could say anything, her son plopped himself down on our blanket and grabbed at the car in Jason's hands. "Gimme," he whined. Jason instantly recoiled and clutched the car tightly to his chest, his eyes wide with anxiety. I gently pulled the bratty kid's hands away and said firmly, "I'm sorry, but this is Jason's favorite toy. He doesn't feel comfortable sharing it with strangers." Karen looked offended. "Why not?" she demanded. "My son wants that car, and it's selfish not to share." She tried to take the car out of Jason's hands, but he burst into tears and wouldn't let go. "Please stop, you're scaring him," I said, putting my arm around Jason. "As I said, he's not comfortable sharing this particular toy. I'm sure your son has toys that are special to him that he doesn't like to share either." "Absolutely not," Karen said shrilly. "We practice an everything belongs to everyone policy in my household. There's no such thing as private property for children. It breeds selfishness." I took a deep breath, trying to remain patient. "While I understand that philosophy, we follow a different policy in our family. Jason finds great comfort in having certain toys that are just his, and I'd appreciate it if you respected that." Karen's eyes flashed with anger. "Why does he need comfort?" she snapped. "What's wrong with him anyway?" Now my blood was starting to boil, but I willed myself to stay calm for Jason's sake. "If you must know, Jason has autism," I said evenly. "He has specific toys that are soothing to him, and it would be unkind to force him to share those against his will." Karen rolled her eyes dramatically. "Oh, great, another overly sensitive snowflake kid whose parents let him get away with anything. He's probably just spoiled, not even disabled." I was absolutely seeing red at this point. How dare this woman speak about my son that way right in front of him? "Jason has a legitimate developmental disability," I said, shaking with anger. "He has just as much right to play with his own toys as any other child. I will thank you to stop harassing him immediately." "Well, I think it's ridiculous," Karen said shrilly, her bratty son now wailing at her feet. "You're raising him to be a selfish little monster who thinks the world revolves around him. He should share his toys with my perfectly normal son or not bring them out in public where other kids can see them." At this point, I'd had just about enough of this horrible woman's verbal abuse. I gathered our things and stood up, clutching Jason and his car tightly. "We will not be sharing today," I said sternly. "Please leave us alone and let my son play with his own toy in peace." Karen looked like she wanted to continue arguing, but I guess she could tell by the fiery look in my eyes that I meant business. With a few more nasty comments thrown our way, she grabbed her son's hand and stomped off. I tried to calm down for Jason's sake and soothe him after that distressing confrontation. I hated that he had been exposed to such an ugly side of human nature, but I was also so proud of him for standing up for himself and not caving to pressure from that bully and her bully-in-training son. When we got home, I let Jason set up an extra special parking garage complete with ice cream sundaes for all his cars. I wanted to send the message that just because someone demands your stuff, you are never obligated to give in. Your property is yours, and you have full right to stand your ground against bullies. The next time we went to the park, I made sure to bring a special park bag full of Jason's very favorite cars and fidget toys. If anyone tried to make demands of my son, I was prepared to go mama bear on them in a heartbeat. But thankfully, we didn't encounter any more Karens. The park was full of supportive parents who understood and empathized with Jason's needs. I was grateful to find a community that accepted my son just as he was, and I knew if any future Karens reared their heads and tried to make Jason feel bad for being himself, I would be right there, defending his right to stim and play in the way that made him happiest. The next one is a pro-revenge story. A family friend worked at the same company from the age of 26 until he was 64 when the following events began. I obtained his approval to retell the story without including specific details to maintain anonymity. Part of the problem was the country's laws increasing the retirement age from 62 to 65 when he was in his early to mid-50s, and then again from 65 to 67 when he was about 62, 63. The previous owners, a family, ran the business with benefits for the employees. From what I have heard, they provided an extra vacation week after every 6 years of employment. So, in addition to the standard 4 weeks, he had an extra 6 weeks at the time of the events. Additionally, people had access to 2 weeks of remote work, or an extra week off if they couldn't utilize it. Thus, he was getting 11 weeks off each year. As a bonus, the family owners allowed people above 55 to use their vacation time as they desired, all at once, with about a 2 weeks' notice, which was just a courtesy according to the guy, segmented or even saved up for retirement. Another issue in our country is that retirement paperwork processing by the government takes a long time. It's often the case that it may take over 2 years to calculate and start payments. During this period, only the minimum amount is paid. However, with about 44 years of experience and a well-paid engineering job, he was expecting a substantial retirement amount. So, the owners allowed people to accumulate their weeks of time off at the end and take 20, 30 weeks off while submitting retirement paperwork. This extended the payout period. Some didn't use it, but many did. Then the company got sold, because the owners saw signs that their profits wouldn't last more than 6, 7 years more due to old age. New ownership, part of a Coca-Cola subsidiary, took over and started removing previous rules. In his position, there were 3 employees. He, a second colleague, and a third one. They let go of the second, fired him, and the third one had a heart attack a week later, RIP. They also reduced his pay by 15% because he is making too much for a simple engineer. The 3 of them held patents for the machinery used in something specific, a second one on how to make that machinery, and a third one on the production process of a small but significant part. The old owner had allowed them to patent the inventions years ago when they found a new, 30% cheaper and 75% faster production method. Suddenly he was alone in that position at 64, and the company hired 6 people for him to train. At the same time, they gave until the end of the year for all accumulated vacation time to be claimed, not used. The guy had only used between 1 and 5 weeks for the past decade, so he had gathered 87 weeks of time off, including the current year. But they hadn't looked at specific cases, apparently. They provided him with 6 new people to train, and they told him that he needed to train them in 6 months. He still had 2.5 years until retirement. He then decided to take 87 weeks of vacation time with a 3-hour notice, starting the upcoming Monday, still no advance notification required. They didn't pay attention until the next Thursday, when the CEO noticed the 6 people sitting around all day with nobody training them. The phone calls, emails, and letters started. Then home visits by low-ranking secretaries and such to deliver the letters. Then management visited his home. By week 7, the CEO had visited 3 times, but the door hadn't been opened once. His mother-in-law lived literally across the street, and he and his wife were taking care of her, so they were usually over there and could see everybody visiting their house. The production was running, but no upkeep was done on that critical part. By week 11, line 1 out of the 2 broke down. They started visiting his house 4 times a day. 2 weeks later, the second line broke down. At that point, they had only 4 weeks of backstock to keep the rest of production running. It was December, right before Christmas, and he went in during week 13. He said he needed to take some things from his locker room, and the CEO started yelling at him. "You are stopping your time off right now. You are coming back to work to fix everything up." So, he offered to come back for 3 days under an agreement that the entire week would be returned to him for time off. The CEO reluctantly agreed and tried to push him also for the training. No budging, only fix things up and go on vacation again. By Saturday, everything was fixed up, and he even left a couple of basic instructions on what needed greasing every week, and he was off again. A few weeks passed, the new year had come around, and a line broke again. He got called back, and the CEO pretended like the previous deal would be used again. He went in for 2 days, fixed everything, explained a couple more things to the team of 6, who by now had other duties, not just sitting around all day. And when he was about to leave, the CEO said, "Tomorrow at 8 a.m.?" The guy said, "What?" And the CEO explained, "You could claim your time off by the end of last year. You just ended your claim time off, so you are losing the remaining 69 weeks. The guy was furious, and he reported the company to workers' rights. They were dumbfounded by the amount of time off he had accumulated, and the lady serving him called her colleagues to listen in. They laughed heartily at his story. They issued a verdict the next day. It usually takes weeks, but apparently they had too much fun with this one. He was to get all of his time off, under the previous rule, for the time accrued before the rules changed. So he had his 69 weeks, should be 70 due to him getting the one he worked on, renewed by their deal, but he lost that one. And he also had the 6 weeks from the new year. He went in with the verdict and gave it personally to the fuming CEO. According to the guy, steam was coming out of his ears. The CEO reluctantly accepted the deal with the guy coming in for 3 days every 5 weeks off. If he was needed during his time off, tough luck. They should work to produce backstock. A full year went by that way, and the guy was 66 at this point. He had been training the 6 slowly every 5 weeks, and he was on his last visit before he took the last 5 weeks off. The CEO went to him and delivered the firing notice personally for the first day he would be back. He played shocked and left for another 5 weeks. This one was a problem because if you applied for retirement even half a year early, you lost significantly more than just that small period, and he had about 10 months ahead of him for retirement. His last 5 weeks expired and he went in to gather his stuff. Only a coffee cup remained. He knew this was coming and had taken everything over time. He got an extremely big payout for the firing with no cause. The next day he sent a cease and desist letter to the company for the use of the 3 patents. He had talked with the fired guy, who had agreed with this revenge plan. He had also talked with the widow of the now deceased friend and colleague, and both of them were on board. He had been supporting the widow, but hadn't said anything to anyone. I found out very recently from the other guy about it. So now the company had to stop using those machines and the method with 0 notice. All the competitors had found, built, and patented their own versions of the same, and if they didn't find a solution, it was going to cost 40% more and take about double the time to produce the same part of the production procedure. So, they would need to double the lines if they used the old method, while they looked for a new one. After just 3 weeks of looking to license the method of one of the competitors and not getting anywhere, stock being extremely low by that point, they struck a deal with the guy. He would be an external contractor who obviously keeps the patents in his name. He would do the maintenance on his own, be paid by the hour, what he was previously making in a full day. And he would be on call for maintenance while having one person there at all times for upkeep. He went and hired all 6 of the people he trained, offering them almost double the pay they were receiving at the factory. He fully trained them very quickly, and now he was getting paid a lot. That CEO was fired for almost stopping production. The deal was struck mere hours before backstock ended. And he also cost the company a ton of money by firing that guy. At the funeral of the old owner, many of the old employees met up and told their different stories. Apparently, there were 3 more similar cases with patent holders because the old owner treated his team extremely well. But he apparently was the only one to string them along for almost 2 years by being out on vacation time and getting paid. All of them had a great laugh, including the widow of the owner and his sister, who were the other 2 partners in the factory before it got sold. The next one is a petty revenge story. My husband and I were having an argument. Probably something stupid, I don't remember now. We were in the middle of it, and I just remember being mad at him, but we called a truce long enough to go get something to eat. His biggest pet peeve was people he doesn't know calling him honey, sweetheart, etc. I told him I needed to use the restroom, and I went to find our waitress. I knew she would be up for the task because she was trying to crack jokes and was a little saucy while getting our drinks. She called him honey, and it's what gave me the idea. I asked her if she would help me with something, and I would give her an upfront 50.00 tip. When I told her what it was, she said she would do it for free LOL, but I tipped her anyway. The task was to lay it on thick with the honey, sweetheart, etc. And boy did she ever. Every time she came to the table, walked by the table, or made eye contact, she would call him babe, honey, sweetly, sugar cakes, and even made up some of her own stuff. He was so mad, but I was trying hard to hold it together. She did fantastic, and as we left told me thank you. Her and the other waitresses had a blast coming up with names. I didn't worry about him being embarrassed because my husband is a massive extrovert and doesn't have a temper. But as soon as we got in the car, he was no longer mad at me, but so pissed off that the waitress kept calling him pet names. To this day, he has no idea, and anytime we go somewhere and someone calls him a pet name, he always says, OMG. Remember that one waitress? The next one is a malicious compliance story. I'm a bus driver. Passengers have to press a stop button if they want the bus to stop at the next stop. Pressing the stop button flicks on a huge banner on the front of the bus, along with making a loud buzz. There are multiple stop buttons on the bus. The condition of buses is quite bad here. Some of the stop buttons are faulty. It's usually not a big deal as passengers can see if the banner is flicked on, and if it's not, the passenger can just press another button or verbally tell me to stop. However, it just doesn't register with some passengers that there is a huge visible and audible banner. Unfortunately, these same passengers tend to lose their minds easily. It was 9:30 p.m. and I was driving between two large suburbs. Let's call them Sunnydale and Riverdale. A passenger must have pressed the stop button, but it didn't register on the banner. As I drove past the stop, he yelled, "Oh, you ducking dog, idiot, you missed me, stop, duckhead." I apologized and tried to explain to him that the button must have been faulty and that I would drop him at the next stop. I told him that I could not drop him off on the side of the road because I would get in trouble from the bus company, as they have GPS tracking whenever I open the bus door. The passenger just yelled, "Stop talking crap and open the door, you black idiot." I stopped at the next stop about 500 meters ahead, but the passenger yelled, "Just go to Riverdale, mate, I ain't walking." Now what the passenger didn't know was that since Sunnyvale was a bigger town, the last bus from Sunnyvale to Riverdale was later than the last bus from Riverdale to Sunnyvale. He would be stranded at Riverdale, 4 kilometers away from his stop. So I kept driving to Riverdale as the passenger requested. I dropped him and the other passengers off and closed the door. I could see him checking the posted timetable on the bus stop. I put my bus into gear and pulled out. I heard him exclaim, "Hey, wait!" as I did so. Unfortunately, I could not have dropped him back to his stop even if I wanted to. I have a strict schedule and change route numbers after each trip. My schedule now was to fill up the bus with diesel and head back to the depot. I filled up my bus and headed back to the bus depot. As I drove back, I saw him walking on the side of the road, from 500 meters to 4,000 meters. The next one is an entitled People story. After driving into NYC from NJ, I get to the area I'm looking to park around. I have a routine of scanning the same 5 blocks I know well, and it usually works out to where I can find a free street spot in an average of 10 minutes. Last night, I happened to see a wide open spot on the second block I drive down just after a couple minutes. Feeling lucky, I turn on my blinker and start to move over to prepare my parallel park. Just one problem. There is a lady standing in the middle of the spot shaking her head at me with her hands up, motioning stop and no. At first, I think she's assuming I'm an Uber driver and she's not the right passenger. So I roll down my window to say I'm trying to park here. This immediately sets her off and she begins spewing some nonsense along the lines of, No, you can't do that. I'm reserving this spot for my friend who's around the corner." I tell her that's the most absurd thing I've ever heard and ask her to remove herself from an open public parking spot. She refuses, arguing that their friend was only a couple minutes away and that because she's lived in New York a long time, she thinks she would know what's right and wrong. This was all followed by a maniacal laugh of hers that indicated to me I wasn't going to get anywhere by further escalating. I decided to drop it and circle around the block. A few minutes pass, and once I get back to the same spot, it is in fact taken, and she is nowhere to be seen. After all that, I ended up finding someone else leaving a few minutes later, but I was still left fuming at the thought of someone so entitled. I realized later that I should have recorded her because it was so unbelievable to encounter someone like that. Has anyone heard of this unspoken rule she thinks exists that you can stand in a spot for someone? She didn't really take the time or have the grace to explain the circumstances of it all, just, "No, you can't park here, my friend's coming." Again, this was a free, public open spot that she was blocking with her body. Never seen or heard of that before, so alas, I turned to Reddit to share. The next one is an entitled Parent Story. So, Last week was my birthday, and a couple of friends took me to one of their favorite restaurants. It was a little hard to choose what to eat, since I didn't want meat or chicken. I'm currently fighting gingivitis, so these more hard-to-chew things are out of my league. And most of the other dishes had shrimp, which I'm allergic to. We decided to have a fish, whose side dish was rice. The rice could be simple or with nuts, which I'm also allergic to. We asked for 2 orders of the fish, one with common rice and the other with rice with nuts. We end up only eating one of the orders, so we ask if the other can be put to go in 2 different bowls, one with the common rice and one with the rice with nuts. The waiter gets the order and goes in the kitchen. He comes back a few minutes later with 2 packages, and I ask which one has the common rice. He says, "I mixed the rice in both of them so that you could have some variation." I was shocked and simply said, "Well, I'm allergic to nuts, so I'll actually have no variation and no fish at all." He wasn't even shook by that and said, "You still can separate the fish, it wasn't that much nut in it." We didn't argue. I simply paid and we left. We had a great time despite of that. But my friends and my sisters, whom I told the story once I was home, told me I should have requested for a different package or some measures with the management of the restaurant. We have specific instructions for him to separate the rices, and now I paid almost $100 for a dish I couldn't eat anymore because of him. I don't like confrontation in these places, and when it happens I kind of shut down and can't help either side, so I always let it go. I'm always scared that if I go into confrontation I will end up being a Kevin. So, should I have gone Kevin on that waiter for making me lose my dish? Or was it not something worth discussing? Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already.